Hi, and welcome to the Getting Grounded with Data podcast. I'm Patti Brownsword, and this is Dr. Jack Slingleff, and we're the co-CEOs of Grounded with Data, a marketing analytics and data analysis coaching and consulting firm. So Jack, what are we talking about today?
Hello, Patti. Today, what we're going to talk about is leadership. We're going to do Leadership 100, and it's the first in the series. We're going to review the fact that there are many different types of leaderships, many theories, many styles of leadership, but really, believe it or not, there's really no unified accepted definition for what leadership is. So today, we're kind of going to focus on two theories, transformational and transactional leadership. Then we're going to talk a little bit about situational leadership, but that's going to be in another podcast at another day. But you may be wondering why we are qualified to talk about leadership.
Yeah, so why are we qualified? Well, we've had leadership training out the yin-yang. Myself, I've had many leadership camps in high school to college to everywhere. Jack has many graduate hours on leadership. We've written tons of articles separately, and we've written so many that we're actually deciding to make a book about leadership. So that's coming soon. And we also have extensive experience leading teams. So let's get into it, Jack. You said there was no accepted definition? What is that?
That is correct, Patti. There's no unified accepted definitions. There's general agreement on transformational and transactional. But as you know, as a martial artist and somebody who's done Kung Fu for a number of years, there's like 500 styles of Kung Fu. Mm-hmm. There's about 10 that are formidable and a bunch that are great, but there's some that aren't so good at the end. But really, what leadership is like Kung Fu, where you have so many different styles. Leadership, I think there's up to 140, 150 different styles or theories of leadership currently floating around. So I'm sure that you'll find the Ninja Monkey drunken version someplace. But at the end of the day, whatever type of leadership theory you adopt, the idea is that you want to inspire followers. Patti, are there always key aspects of leadership that are necessary regardless of whatever you choose to do?
Of course there are, Jack. Great question. There are key aspects of leadership that are necessary regardless of whatever you choose to do. The first is trust. And one of the biggest things I've learned around trust and compassion is that you need to listen to the other person. And that with compassion, you just not listen, but you have to understand what they're actually saying. I've tended to be a problem solver, and I had to learn that some people don't want their manager to kind of fix it. They just want to have the manager listen and ask questions to help them get on the right path. Another way to build trust is to build credibility by treating your team as if they are a group of people that you as a manager are there to protect and encourage. And a surefire way to erode that is to let the terrible terrors, as they're called, continue on their path of destruction. But backing up for a second, there are high performers who they get results and they have great skills. They live the values and they have a good attitude. They're very easy to manage. Then there are the low performers who don't get results and don't have great skills and don't live the values and don't have a good attitude. And they're easy to let go. But as I mentioned, there's that other group of people who have those high skills and get results, but have the bad attitude or don't live by the values of the organization that are the most difficult. And those are those talented terrors. And even though a group of people, even though the group is good at what they do, if they don't change their attitude or begin to follow company values, they erode the credibility and trust of the organization and you. So no matter how much money they bring into your company, if they're a terrible terror and don't change their ways, you'll find that your company actually will benefit from their removal. And then there's the last one that we always like to say is in the leadership IQ class that I took, it's called Bless Their Hearts. And you and I use that for many things. But in this particular instance, these are people that live the values of the company and have the best attitudes, but they're terrible at what they do. So anyway, the second component, so the first was trust. The second is confidence. There's a huge difference between the confidence levels of men and women, and those differences are caused by both nurture and nature. But confidence in humans and non-humans alike can stem from the chemical makeup of their body and whether they have like fast or slow metabolisms to absorb them. And this is the foundation to whether you take risks or sit on the sidelines. And then parents and the outside environment help shape whether the absorption rate becomes good or bad, a good or bad influence on confidence. So the book that I read called Confidence Code gives great advice on how we should start raising like our daughters to help enable them to make like good, confident choices. And that's where I learned all that. But another place I've learned something is from Pooja, our executive coach and dear friend of mine. One time we were having a conversation about something, and she actually said, and I quoted her on this in like a blog post I wrote later on. So I know what it is. I'm going to read it to you. It says, she said, you do realize that confidence stems from practice, right? I considered you and myself some of the most confident women around. And yet when we get to a moment in our lives we haven't experienced before, we clam up and can't easily make decisions about it. Isn't that funny how it still happens to us? And I was like, that is so true. And that's why it's important to learn about leadership before you actually take the leap. If you have the tools and you can talk the talk, then it'll help you feel more confident when you finally walk the walk, right? And so the last of the key aspects is communication. And this is learning how to communicate as a leader to be to make it critical for your success. And there are lots of different frameworks, and we'll stick them in the show notes with links so that you can go see what they are. But in Crucial Conversations, it's called the ideals approach, the framework is Crucial Conversations. Just go study that. And then there's the ideals approach, the IDEALS, the calm approach for dealing with talented terrors, the halt and fire methods to know when to provide feedback and when not to. Like I said, we'll dive deeper in that in like the article and the show notes and stuff. So that's my master monologue on the important key aspects, but Jack is going to get into the two primary styles of leadership that guide whatever substyle you choose.
Well, Patti, first of all, thank you. That was great insights that you shared. I'm curious about the models now. I'm not familiar with calm, but I would like to learn it in the terror model as well. But transformational and transactional leaders. Well, transformational leadership has really evolved over time. It started from works by a guy named James Downton, and then was expanded upon by James McGregor Burns. And then ultimately, the current definition is by Bass. And so transformational leaders garner trust, respect, and admiration of their followers. The definition is getting subordinates to transform their self-interest into the interest of the group through concern of the broader goal. And this, I got the definition from a book called by Wren, and it's called The Leadership Companion. I highly recommend it. Transactional leadership. Now, this is a little bit different. Transactional leadership is older in nature and actually goes back to our ancient military roots. But the idea is to promote compliance by followers through either rewards or punishment. And the idea is that with a transactional leader, you give them a benefit or a punishment for executing X, whatever X would be. Take that mountain, have a sales meeting, whatever it might be. But the focus tends to be short-term rather than long-term in nature. And so, whereas transformational leadership is more of a long-term building kind of process. So really the definition of transactional leadership is an exchange rewards for services rendered or punishment for inadequate performance. And again, that's from Wren's book. I highly recommend this as a good reference guide.
Cool, Jack. Well, we've done a lot of research on leadership, but what are aspects of leadership that conventional research has failed to address so far?
Patti, that's a great question. And like all things in academics, there's a lot of different perspectives, but there's also a lot of opportunities. For example, Bass himself argues that the relationship between the leaders and their subordinates hasn't been fully explained or fully studied. Avillo and Gardner, they really want to know more about sustained performance. Is this particular model sustainable? And it might be short-term, might be long-term in nature. That hasn't really been studied. Avillo and Yamarino really feel that they need to know more about the cross-cultural implications. So what works here may not work elsewhere. what works elsewhere may not be transplantable here.
I'm taking an international business class. That is apparent.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then also kind of like studies like the level of self-awareness between the leaders and their subordinates. In other words, do they realize the roles that they're playing are affecting? And then really, what is the effect of a leader's positive psychological capital on followers and their contribution for sustained performance? Big fancy way of saying, does it work? And what's the actual impact on it of the situation? So those are some of the theories, but there's plenty more.
So it feels like there's still so much work to be done, but it's kind of hard in the human dynamics. And I imagine now with the pandemic, the styles of communication and other effects of leadership, and now the kind of top-down thought of having to watch people all the time, because if they're not in the office working, what are they doing? Or they're at home working, they're getting the job done, right? It's all a whole new world. So taking a different angle, is it possible to predict who will become a superior leader? And then if so, how would you do it? And how would you do it, Jack? And what level of confidence would you have in the results?
Let me just say, in theory, but yeah, in theory, yeah. So in my mind, I have many different ways in which I think it could be measured into a predictable model. However, the challenges are, so number one, we don't really have that unified theory. Mm-hmm. So at the end of the day, what we end up testing is actually the theory itself, and not whether or not the whole notion of leadership has been addressed. So it might be that drunken monkey style of leadership that we talked about earlier. Mm-hmm. We'd only know that the drunken monkey style of leadership was effective. So that's one of the challenges. And so you can't get a broader dynamic until you get a unified definition. And other things, for example, you can look at the different traits of leadership, but you really have to have a kind of a set to be able to test them. So thankfully, like for transformational leadership and transactional leadership, there are certain traits that are applicable that you can measure. So you have cultural empathy, open-mindedness, social initiatives, and significant association with effective leadership. But that's for a transformational leader. And so we just need to learn more about it. But to close the gap, we first need to have that definition or an agreement on what the definition would be. And until we get that, we really can't predict exactly, other than within a style or a theory of leadership. We can predict that itself, whether it will work or not, and whether these traits were prevalent. But until we have like a broader definition, we're really guessing. So in theory, but
there's been, talk this year, and hopefully this podcast, we wanted to kind of stay evergreen, but one of the, and this is off the cuff and unscripted, Jack, but knowing President Zelensky from Ukraine has really transformed into a true leader.
He's amazing.
Is that something that could have been predicted? Or is it something that he has hopefully found people to help train him to do?
That's a great question. And since we're kind of going through this literally live, so my apologies for being a little bit choppy, but if you would have thought about Zelensky, yes, he is an amazing leader. He's demonstrating all the check boxes you'd want from a leader in the situation he's in. However, if we think back to when we started learning about him, before he was a comedian, he was an actor, he did a lot of things. From that, could we have extrapolated that he had the qualities or traits necessary to be a leader? Not exactly sure. His first introduction to the United States was in the midst of a scandal.
Yeah.
And in that time, if you look at his interaction, was he exhibiting leadership traits at that point? Well, the jury's really out on that, but could we have predicted from 2018 when we all became aware of him to now? There's a night and day difference actually on who he is. Mm-hmm. So that's a great question, Patti.
Yeah, I thought that would be interesting as a follow-up. So just came up with it on the fly.
Love it.
Yeah. So the last thing we'll kind of talk about on Leadership 100, because there's going to be a 101 and a 102, and we'll dive deeper a little bit into these things. So this is just little surface level stuff. But what are some tips to start our listeners on their leadership journey?
Well, I think the first place to start for anybody is to start to recognize what leadership style you're projecting. Is that consistent with yourself, your inner being, with the organization? Where's that coming from? So start to become aware. Are you acting more like transactional leadership, where you're expecting an exchange in for punishment or benefit? Or are you a transformational leader where you're trying to empower your subordinates to follow by their interest in the final outcome? So you first become aware. Secondly, whatever your leadership style is, make sure it's in alignment with the organization. So within an organization, challenges occur because you might have the mission statement express one type of leadership, but you have kind of a mix and match throughout the departments or the various leaders, which actually will lead to a conflict. Mm. And so to ameliorate the conflict out of that, what you need to do is actually start to align that. And if the mission statement is transactional, by all means, be transactional. But if the mission statement is transactional or transformational, start to work towards that and start to pull in the other groups. Now, Patti, this is off script a little bit too, but I don't know if you're aware, but there are certain departments that by their very nature tend to gravitate towards transactional or transformational. For example, IT departments are more, you want to guess? Transactional. And that's the way it is. This is the code. I want you to have it ready. And if you get the job done, you only have to work 60 hours this week. So
yeah. There are tickets, there are jobs, there are roles, there's resource management allocation, boom, done, go.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But the general rule of thumb is try not to mix and match the leadership styles within your organization. It really does confuse the kids.
I bet.
See, train to the expectation you want. Like I said earlier, what we want is alignment from the top to the bottom, the mission statement or the steering statements to what is being executed on the floor. And I lean more towards the transactional or transformational.
What?
Yeah. Freud, no, I lean more towards the transformational leadership style, but there are times where situational is important and where you have to adapt your style to solve an immediate problem at that moment of truth.
Sure.
The best quote, I'm bringing out my inner nerd for you, Patti, and I think you know it, John, is Darth Vader from Empire Strikes Back. We can dispense with the pleasantries. I'm here to put you back on schedule.
Yeah.
That's situational leadership, but it's also very transactional. You were not going to miss that deadline.
No.
Anyway, recognize that even Bass says that there are times that your leadership style needs to be situational. So,
and that's one of the biggest things that I've learned in all the trainings is that as a leader, you have to know all the styles. You don't get to pick the style. You lead how people want to be led.
That's good point too.
One of the greatest leadership trainings I took was actually very focused, and it was Fred Pryor's How to Handle Emotions Under Pressure. And that shows you, one, how people identify differently as how they handle pressure, or they don't identify, they just do it. They're not like, oh, I'm this person under pressure. It's just they're doing the thing. And you're like, you're under pressure. You have to respond to them differently. And so not only do you have to learn what people want in a leader, but then you have to teach them how to do that best, or how you have to coach them and be their manager, be their leader in the way that they want to be. And we'll dive a lot more into that in like 101 and 102 on when to be able to know and call those things out. But some other leadership trainings we've taken. Jack, you took like theory, applications, and ethics,
yes,
which is super important. I locally in Orlando, I've done Athena leadership training, and it's for women, focused on 8 pillars of leadership with a kind of a understanding it from a female or woman's perspective, and how to embrace that and engage with that. And so we'll talk about that some other time too. And then the last one I talked about like it a little bit earlier, but it's called Leadership IQ. And the guy is really really funny and engaging, but he's the one that does a lot of like the like knowing the halt or fire or calm. So that way you already have those tools in your toolbox when you're like, when you're hit with something and you're like, oh, aha, let me make sure that this is a thing, you know? So yeah, so that's it for today.
Oh, I did have one other
Yeah,
point
what do you
about
have?
leadership, is that no matter what style of leadership you are, or your organization wants you to be, or your followers are, they're not always commutable from one organization to the next. So it's very personalized when you think about it, because you could take a transactional leader like General Patton.
Mhm.
He's a great leader, no question about it. His followers loved him, but he was transactional. You take that hill, you didn't argue. You cannot make him the president of a local PTA. That is a leadership style that would fail in that situation. Or you would work with Girl Scout cookie salespeople, but yeah, other than that, no, because those are little ninjas behind every Publix column. I'm just joking, but seriously, though, you can't necessarily take one style and apply it in every situation. But I'll probably edit that part out.
No, you
So
won't.
good.
We're gonna keep it. We're keeping it in.
No,
All right.
edit. That could be a story for another day.
All right. Well, all right, folks. Well, it was a real pleasure. Once again, we did a lot of dawdling up front, so I have no idea actually how long this is until we finish cleaning it up and getting it out there, but we should do that soon. And until next time, I'm Patti, and this is Jack, and you're getting grounded with data.
Bye.
Bye.